Stop, you haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Subscribe now. We have new stories every day. Now let's go. My dad gave me some solid advice when I started dating. He said, men of value don't accept disrespect, manipulation, or lies from women. Stay true to yourself and always be a man of value. It's something I've tried to live by. So, there I was, talking to my wife, Abigail. There's been a change of plans. The merger meeting got pooved up, and I have to leave tomorrow morning. I won't be back until late Sunday. I get how important this wedding is, especially since you're the maid of honor, but I just got promoted to CFO. Missing this meeting isn't an option for the company or for our future. I'm really sorry. She didn't take it well. Are you serious? We've been planning this for so long, and now you're canceling at the last minute? I'll have to go alone. Do you know how embarrassing that'll be for me? Can't someone else take your place? Abigail, this deal's worth over $2 billion, and I'm leading it. We've been working on it for the past year, and no one can step in for me. A lot of people's jobs depend on this deal going through. I know it's tough, and I'll make it up to you with the bonus from the deal. I understand why you're upset, but there's nothing I can do. I'll be back Sunday. She was furious. After that conversation, she stopped talking to me and told me to sleep in the guest room. No intimacy, no closeness before my trip. That was unlike her. This coldness, this anger. I tried to understand, but I couldn't calm her down. The consolation stars had stood at the base of the building for centuries, with their presence reminded of that all the time. I tried to understand, but I couldn't calm her down. And so I packed for my trip and spent the night in the guest room. I knew how important this wedding was to Abigail. Her friend Margaret had been through a lot. Margaret's ex-husband cheated on her during a serious illness and left her because he couldn't handle her slow recovery. It devastated Margaret. But after a miraculous recovery, she filed for divorce and battled depression for the next 5 years. Her friends and family were there for her, but nothing seemed to lift her spirits. Then one day she met a man at a grocery store, and just like that, her world brightened again. Her new fiancé, Brandon, adored her, and the wedding was a huge celebration of her comeback. Abigail had stood by Margaret's side through all of it, and now she was her maid of honor. I knew cancelling at the last minute hurt her, but my hands were tied. I figured I'd just have to take the heat and make it up to her when I got back. The next morning, before leaving, I tried to give Abigail a goodbye kiss, but the bedroom door was locked. She didn't open it. I said I loved her and promised to call from Italy when I landed. With a heavy heart, I walked out to the waiting limo, feeling terrible about the situation. I began to drive away when I heard a familiar voice. After 19 years of marriage, I thought Abigail would understand the predicament, but it didn't seem like that was happening. I called her before my flight, but it went to voicemail. I left another apology, hoping for a response. I sent a text before takeoff and another after landing, but nothing. I knew she was mad, and I would need to apologize a lot to get back in her good graces. With no other option, I called our twin daughters at college, Taylor and Sloane, and explained the situation. I asked them to check on their mum and make sure she was okay. They understood and reassured me that they'd keep an eye on her. They've always been Daddy's girls, and I cherish them for that. When I arrived in Italy, I checked into the hotel and got in touch with my CEO, only to hear some unexpected news. The meeting was cancelled. The CEO of the other company had a family emergency, and they had to push things back. I immediately booked a direct flight to Philadelphia International Airport, which was only about 30 minutes from the wedding reception. The reception was set for 7 p.m, and I figured I could make it by 9:00 I hoped showing up would make things right with Abigail. After landing, I grabbed a rental car, and the GPS led me straight to the venue. I got there just after 9, and the place was buzzing. Music, dancing, drinks. Everyone was having a great time, and some folks were clearly having a bit too much fun. And perhaps I felt relieved to be there, even though it had been a long day of travel. I grabbed a double bourbon from the bar and started looking for Abigail. At intervals, I went up to the top shelves and found the undisclosed amount of gold, a pair of dark briefcases and 2 polished plastic jugs. It took a while to spot her among the crowd of over 200 people. As I sipped my drink and scanned the room, memories of our time together came flooding back. Abigail is 5 years older than me, and when we met, she'd just gone through a divorce. Her ex-husband, Dr. Edward Walker, had cheated on her with a nurse while doing his residency. That betrayal hit her hard, both emotionally and financially. She was a waitress at the time, working hard to make ends meet. When I met her, despite everything she had been through, I saw something special. We've been married for 19 years, and we've raised our twin daughters, Taylor and Sloane, with so much love. We've built a life together, and Abigail always appreciated how straightforward and loyal I've been in our relationship. We often talked about how important loyalty is, and I admired her for leaving her cheating ex. That resilience was something I deeply respected. And marriage was something that was important to both of us. So henceforth, I now bow before you. Our marriage had been built on trust and commitment, and I thought it was rock solid. Then I spotted Abigail. She was sitting with Edward, her ex-husband. I knew he was friends with Margaret, but I hadn't expected him to be here, especially not without his wife. It took me by surprise. Feeling drained from the travel, I stood back for a moment watching them. They looked pretty friendly, considering their history. Before I could move closer, Abigail stood up, took his hand, and led him to the dance floor. She looked incredible in her ivory dress, and I hoped this was just an innocent moment. I hoped it was just an innocent dance, but as they moved through several slow songs, I couldn't help feeling uneasy. Abigail had been drinking. I could tell from her flirty behavior. Normally, a few drinks made her more affectionate and playful with me, but seeing her like this, dancing with another man, especially her ex, was unsettling. Then came the moment that shattered me. She kissed him, right there in front of everyone. That act left me feeling humiliated and furious. Watching Abigail share such an intimate moment with Edward, seeing him touch her inappropriately and exchange kisses, put me in utter shock and anger. I was livid. Just as I was about to step in and stop it, they moved back to a table off to the side. There, they started kissing again. This time, like they were on their honeymoon. I could clearly see his hands on her chest and her hand under the table. Right before I confronted them, it hit me. My marriage was over. I remembered what my dad always said. Respect yourself, son. Don't put up with being treated badly. So I decided to act, but I kept my cool. Sure, I could have caused a scene, ruined the perfect wedding and stopped them from going any further. But then I thought, if she's into him, she can have him. She's not mine anymore. No longer is she in control, said she, and I replied, no longer is she. A short pause, and then she continued, there's not mine anymore. Feeling oddly calm, I took out my phone, zoomed in, and snapped a bunch of close-up pictures, along with a short video. Then I texted her. I do sometimes simply say, guess what, sweetheart? My meeting got pushed, and I'm back early. Seems like you're in good hands tonight. I'll head back home, guessing you'll be staying the night with Dr. Edward Walker. Now I get why you've been ignoring my calls and texts. Have a blast, and cheers to our marriage ending. I'll be gone by the time you come back tomorrow. End of tale number 4. I pressed send and watched calmly, curious to see her reaction. Sure enough, I saw her phone light up. She picked it up, looked down, and started pressing buttons, clearly checking the text. Zero Gia. Abigail sobered up fast. Her face turned serious the moment she read my message. As soon as I noticed her reaction, I left the party and headed to my car. I heard her yelling, Michael, please wait. But I just gave her a cold look, shook my head, and got in my car. Before she could catch up, I drove off. My phone started blowing up with calls, but I was too upset to think about picking up. If she wanted to go back to her ex, that was fine by me. After seeing them together, we were definitely done. It had been 22 years since she left him, and now she runs back to him the first chance she gets. She's got some explaining to do to our family and the kids, because this mess is on her. Stars and Stripes was written and directed by Richard DeVilliers. My phone kept filling up with desperate text. Michael, please come back. I need to explain. I love you. Please come back. Damn it, Michael. It's not what you think. I love you. But after 2 days of long flights, no calls or texts back from her, her cold attitude, and then seeing her with Edward, I wasn't interested in hearing her out. Good advice, my coach said. I was as mad as I could be and wanted nothing to do with her or her excuses. After ignoring about 20 calls and texts, I finally stopped and sent one text back. Sarah Paris just responded, "Forget you. I'm doing great with my job. My kids are off to college and everything's paid for. I'm free to do as I please." I still had enough youth left to start over. After driving 4 hours of my 7-hour journey back to Louisville, I stopped at a diner to grab a meal and take a quick nap in the car before finishing my trip home. While enjoying my eggs and bacon, I decided to share my feelings with the world. Back then, Facebook was the go-to platform for updates on your life. Between bites, I changed my status from happily married to single and available, and uploaded 2 photos I'd taken of Abigail and Edward sharing a passionate kiss at the wedding. In the second photo, his hand was clearly on her chest. Below the photo I wrote, "Abigail is upgrading and reuniting with her ex-husband while I'm back on the dating scene. It may have been immature, but it was the truth. I was moving forward without her." The funny thing was, Edward was nearly 50, balding, overweight, and honestly not an upgrade in any way. It baffled me why she would ditch us for some old guy who'd already cheated on her. Maybe she preferred a doctor over an accountant. Honestly, it hurt. It hurt a lot. I felt more pain than I could ever remember. I was sad, angry, but also kind of amused. She was ending a 19-year marriage for an old guy who cheated on her over 20 years ago. Forget her and forget him. They're made for each other. I'm not the type to tolerate that kind of disrespect. Some might say it was just a kiss, and some touching, not worth leaving her over. Well, in my book, either my woman is committed to me or she's free to be with someone else. We all make our choices. After my late breakfast and a 2-hour nap in the car, I hit the road again, pulling into my driveway at 7 a.m. When I turned on my phone, it started blowing up with notifications. So many came in that I thought they'd never stop. There were over 100 messages from her, her parents, her sister, and her friends. Within 5 minutes of turning on my phone, it started ringing. It was Abigail. I wondered if she'd gotten any sleep last night, or if she'd spent it with Edward. No matter. I ignored her calls because I was past all that. Now I was focused only on getting what I needed out of the house and moving on. I've always gotten along well with her family, and when they called that morning, I took their call. I explained everything to her dad, James. "James, I had no idea she was unhappy with our marriage, but this was the breaking point. The disrespect she showed me in front of people we know is something I can't tolerate. It's clear she still has feelings for that man, so she can be with him. I plan to find a woman who will value what I bring to the table and remain faithful." The other option was simple. I'd move out today and put the house up for sale tomorrow morning. I'd contact a lawyer to start the divorce process. She could stay in the house until it's sold, and I'd make sure everything was divided fairly. Call me old-fashioned, but I won't live with someone who clearly wants someone else. She made her choice, but I don't think it was a wise one. After a few minutes of silence, I broke the tension. Michelle called me over to her. James, her father, arrived over an hour later. He pleaded with me to wait and talk to Abigail before making such drastic decisions. But when he asked me to give her a chance to explain, I pointed to the photos again, proof of how openly they'd fondled each other at the wedding. And he tells us this: proof that life fundamentally isn't pretty real indeed. So how do you make it pretty? I couldn't tolerate that. Not after everything. James was clearly disappointed, not just in Abigail's actions, but also in how quickly I had made up my mind. When I stepped into what used to be our home, the reality of it hit me hard. Tears welled up as I realized that our once happy home was now just a hollow shell of what had been a marriage. Over the past 5 years, we'd turned this house into our dream home. Back when mortgage rates were below 2.99%, we refinanced the home at its full value, extracting nearly $500,000 in equity. As an accountant, it made sense. I set up $200,000 trust funds for Taylor and Sloane's college education, with a little extra to help them kickstart their adult lives. The remaining $100,000 went toward upgrading the house, turning it into a place we loved. Thanks to the lower interest rate, the monthly payment only went up by $700, which was manageable. Abigail had even gone back to work as a receptionist to cover the extra costs. My salary was decent, not extravagant, but as the newly promoted CFO, I was due to receive stock options the following year. Those shares would have been our nest egg for retirement. Abigail never took much interest in our finances, though. As long as her needs were met, she trusted me to handle everything. And I did. We had a comfortable life, and I looked forward to our future. I'd tried explaining the stock options to her, but her lack of interest didn't bother me. As the business progressed and successive generations became, I began to understand. Now, with the merger delayed and the end of my marriage looming, the stock options, roughly 400, zero shares, if the deal went through, wouldn't factor into the divorce settlement. If they ever hit $100 a share, the payout would be significant, but that was years down the line. I planned to file for irreconcilable differences and divide our assets, which amounted to around $50,000 in savings. We'd split the proceeds from selling the house, but since it was heavily mortgaged, there wouldn't be much left to divide. At 44, Abigail would walk away with her car and roughly $25,000. If she'd stayed faithful, she could have enjoyed a loving life and a secure future. But now, my anger and humiliation overshadowed any affection or memories I had for her. All I wanted was closure, and for her to understand the magnitude of what she'd lost. Seeing Edward again after 20 years brought back a flood of memories, both good and bad. He was once her husband, and they'd had a decent relationship until his infidelity ended their marriage. From everything Abigail told me, he was never as special to her as I was. So, after a dreadful divorce, she set out to reconnect with him. I was the one she'd chosen to marry after him. I was her partner for 19 years. A more attractive man, a better provider, and, I believed, someone she truly loved. And yet here she was, letting Edward hold her and kiss her, knowing full well it wasn't right. She'd kept flirting with him, even though she knew she shouldn't. She'd had too much to drink and felt upset that I hadn't been there with her. But instead of stopping herself, she'd let it happen. Edward still seemed like her perfect match in some ways, and she probably thought a little harmless flirting wouldn't hurt. After all, he was single now, and I hadn't rearranged my plans to join her at this important wedding. Maybe she thought she deserved to enjoy herself. Mission completed, set off now. The crew re-arrived and entered the vessel, where settings awaited them. When Edward kissed her again, she felt a fleeting happiness. His kisses reminded her of the old days. While they danced closely in a private corner, she convinced herself that a little kissing and closeness was harmless. Everyone else at the party was having a good time, so why shouldn't she? She told herself she'd make things right with me later. Then came my text. Her phone buzzed, and she assumed it was me checking in. When she read the message, panic set in. She knew she was in trouble. She couldn't see me at first, but when she figured out I was leaving, Abigail freaked out. She made up an excuse to Edward about needing to use the restroom and rushed out of the wedding. Her heart pounded as she spotted the exit door swinging shut. She raced down the hall, her high heels clacking against the floor. When she saw me, she knew. She called out, "Michael, please wait!" But I didn't respond. I got into my car and left without a word. She tried to follow, but it was too late. I was already pulling away. Now she's bombarding me with calls and texts, desperate for a response. She's devastated, and rightly so. She knows why I'm ignoring her. After sending another 10 messages, she finally got a response from me. "Forget you." Later, 2 of her friends found her outside, kneeling in the cold, trying to piece together what had just happened. They were shocked by what she'd done and worried about the future of our marriage. They knew me well enough to understand one thing. I wasn't going to let this go easily. The next morning, back in Louisville, I sat in the kitchen of what used to be our home, sipping one last cup of coffee. I felt a mix of sadness and anger. When I finished, I left the empty cup in the sink and wrote a brief note for Abigail. In it, I instructed her not to call me and told her we'd talk once the divorce papers were ready. I didn't even sign it. Instead, I left my wedding ring on top as a final gesture. Then I walked out the door for the last time. Before leaving, I opened my laptop, divided our funds, and cancelled every joint account we shared. They did their job well. When Abigail tried to stop by on Monday, she quickly realized that seeing or talking to me at work was no longer an option. Despite her repeated efforts, I was determined to have no contact with her. She didn't know where I was staying and couldn't reach me by phone. Feeling isolated, regretful, and fearful about what lay ahead, she had no choice but to sit with the consequences of her actions. Amid all this, my daughters, Taylor and Sloane, reached out to me in a panic. They urged me to speak with their mother. I explained to them, calmly but firmly, that their mother had chosen someone else. To me, that act was a clear betrayal. I emphasized how seriously I took trust. Before they could argue further, I made it clear. What their mother did wasn't just a mistake. It was a breach of the trust that held our family together. They seemed to understand my stance and respected my decision, even if it hurt them to see us this way. I wanted them to know that their mother's choices had consequences and that our divorce was inevitable. Still, I reassured them. I told them I would always be there for them and that no matter what happened, I wanted them to remain a big part of my life. I also took the opportunity to impart a life lesson. I told them to always respect their future spouses and understand the gravity of betrayal, because not everyone would be as forgiving. Afterward, I shared a post on Facebook. I wasn't expecting much, just a way to close the chapter. But the response was overwhelming. Friends and family started calling, wanting to know what was going on. And something else unexpected happened. I suddenly became quite popular with women. It felt surreal. I found myself going out with women younger than me, women full of energy and excitement, something I hadn't experienced in years. The constant complaints and negativity I'd endured from Abigail were replaced with exciting dates, affectionate texts, and the thrill of attention from women who just wanted to have a good time. A month after that post, I met Julia. She would later become my wife. We hit it off immediately and became a couple shortly after my divorce from Abigail was finalized. When Abigail found out about my new life, she wasn't happy. She was mostly angry at herself, but also jealous and upset that I hadn't given her a second chance before moving on. She tried to meet up with me, but I refused all her attempts, only dealing with her through our lawyers. Eventually, we sold the house. After paying the real estate agent and other costs, there wasn't much left, less than $11,000 in equity. I decided Abigail could have that small amount. Her lawyers worked hard to secure a share of my future earnings, but the court ruled they couldn't base the settlement on potential income. Instead, they calculated my alimony payments based on my average income at the time. Since Abigail had a job, the alimony wasn't burdensome. I agreed to pay her $2,000 a month for 2 years, enough to help her get by until she could stand on her own or find someone else. Thank you. In the years that followed, Abigail and I never spoke directly, only through our lawyers. She moved to Milwaukee, joined a support group, and eventually began living with Dr. Edward Walker, with whom she had grown close. But she wasn't the same happy person she had been with me. She realized, too late, the cost of her actions. Driven by anger and selfishness, she knew my reaction would be severe, but that night she acted as if our marriage didn't matter, as if she were single again. Apparently, she hadn't heard the religious words traveling abroad because she was too busy fucking. 3 years later, at our daughter's graduation, Abigail met my new wife, Julia. Julia was 28, pregnant, and holding our 1-year-old daughter, Eva. Abigail, now 47, looked much older. Edward had accompanied her, but he hung back, sensing the tension. Later, Abigail managed to speak with me alone. She wanted to apologize, filled with regret for her actions and the life we could have continued to share. She acknowledged the mistake of risking our once perfect life for nothing. I told Abigail that I had forgiven her. While I never expected to find her in someone else's arms, I thanked her for the good times we had, for our 2 wonderful daughters, and for the love we once shared. Her actions, as painful as they were, had led me to Julia and a new family. That realization helped me move past my anger. The question extended to me, and the answer was negative. I now realized that although I was alone, even in my solitude, that realization helped me move past my anger. I advised her to focus on her future and assured her that our past was behind us. I wished her well and expressed hope that we could see each other at family events without animosity. At that moment, Julia joined me, holding Eva in her arms. I introduced them to each other. The difference in their ages was stark. Abigail, at 47, could easily have been mistaken for Julia's mother. That realization deepened Abigail's regret. She had lost the love of her life over a single night of anger and selfishness. Over the following decade, our paths crossed again at our daughters' weddings. Abigail remained unmarried, but continued her life with Edward, who treated her kindly. Still, seeing me with Julia and our young daughters stirred up memories of the happy life she once had with me. A life that was now just a memory. In a twist of fate, that summer I cashed in my stock options and bought back the old family home when it came on the market. My entire family, Julia, our daughters, and even friends, were thrilled to have the house filled with so many memories back in our lives. In that moment, I recognized the key characters of my youth, things like the street thriller films Crime, Toy Story, and the Martian prequels. I turned to my favorite part of the film. Taylor and Sloane especially enjoyed visiting, reminiscing about their childhood in that loving home. Abigail wasn't part of this new chapter, and I imagine she must have regretted not cherishing the life we'd built together. Life moves forward though, and as I create new memories with Julia and our daughters, I've come to accept it all as a lesson. Before you choose to betray someone, make sure you're ready to live without them, because life doesn't always offer second chances. Thanks to everyone who listened to my story. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Take care. Mayastia is Astrology 1.0, an explorer of the gods and hero in the myth. She finds comfort in these uncertain times.